The crystal chandelier in the rooftop ballroom of the Zenith shimmered like 1,000 mocking eyes. I stood there, my hands still smelling faintly of lavender floor wax and industrial lemon cleaner, the sense of my real life. I had spent 6 months preparing my gift. It wasn't a designer handbag or a lease on a European sports car. It was a hand-bound leather journal, filled with the original, hand-drawn blueprints of the software architecture that had founded the tech era, the very foundation of the modern cloud. My daughter Clara held it between two manicured fingers like it was a piece of trash she'd found on the subway. She glanced at her fiancé, Julian Vane, and his mother Eleanor, then let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "Mom," Clara whispered, her voice tight with a humiliation she didn't bother to hide. "We registered at Cartier. Julian's family doesn't do scrapbooks." Julian took the journal from her hands. He didn't even open it. He tossed it onto the gift table, where it slid across the silk cloth and landed on the floor, next to a discarded champagne cork. "Your mother's a janitor at my firm, babe," Julian said, flashing that perfect, expensive smile at the crowd of venture capitalists and socialites. "What did you expect? A Series B funding round?" She probably found the leather in the bin. The laughter that followed was polite, filtered through $200 a bottle sparkling water. It was the kind of laughter that tells you exactly where you sit on the social ladder. I didn't say a word. I walked to the gift table, knelt down, and picked up my journal. I wiped a smudge of dust from the cover, tucked it into my worn canvas bag, and walked toward the elevator. "Mom, don't be dramatic," Clara called out. But she didn't follow me. The next morning, I didn't go to the tech firm to mop the floors. I drove to the highest-rated forensic accounting firm in Manhattan. When the senior partner saw the encryption keys and property deeds I laid on his desk, he dropped his pen and stood up. "Mrs. Miller," he whispered, "we thought the founding ghost was a myth. You've been hiding in plain sight this whole time?" "I like the view from the floor," I said. "You see things people at the top are too arrogant to notice. Now, let's talk about Julian Vane." The Zenith was a 60-story glass needle in the heart of the city. To Clara and Julian, it was a playground. To me, it was a building I had purchased in 2012, under a blind trust. I worked as a night shift cleaning specialist there, not because I had to, but because I believe you never truly know a person until they think you're beneath them. Clara was my only child. After my husband, David, passed away when she was 6, I poured everything into her. But David and I had a philosophy. You earn your character. You don't inherit it. I kept my wealth a secret. We lived in a modest rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn. I told her I worked in maintenance. She hated it. As she grew, her shame became a weapon. She wanted the life she saw on social media, the life Julian Vane promised her. Julian was the golden boy of Vane Analytics, a firm that operated out of the 45th floor of my building. He was tall, polished, and carried the kind of entitlement that only comes from never being told no. For 3 years, I watched from the shadows. I emptied Julian's trash cans while he bragged about disrupting the market. I scrubbed the floors of the boardroom while he belittled his subordinates. I saw the way he looked at Clara not as a partner, but as a trophy he'd won. But most importantly, I saw the files he left on his desk. Julian thought the janitor was invisible. He thought I was just a ghost in a blue uniform who couldn't read a spreadsheet. He was wrong. I was the one who wrote the code that Vane Analytics was built on. I knew where every digital backdoor was. And for the last 6 months, I had noticed a pattern of disappearing capital. Have you ever been treated like you were invisible just because of your job? Have you ever had someone you love choose status over your heart? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. I read every single one. And if you're ready to see how a janitor can topple an empire, hit that like button. It helps this story of justice reach more people who need to hear it. In 1998, the world was obsessed with the dot-com boom, but I was obsessed with logic. I was one of the 3 architects behind the Siren Protocol. At the time, people didn't understand it, but it was the silent engine that eventually made modern cloud computing possible. It was elegant, unbreakable, and most importantly, it was mine. When our company went public, my 2 partners did exactly what you'd expect. They sold every share, bought private islands in the Pacific, and spent the next decade chasing sunsets. I took a different path. I took my share, every cent of it, and moved it into a diversified portfolio of Manhattan real estate and high-grade municipal bonds. Then, I disappeared. I didn't want the tech magazine covers or the keynote stages. I wanted to build a legacy that actually moved the needle for people who weren't born with a silver spoon. I wanted to be a ghost in the machine. By 2024, my quiet life had grown into a powerhouse. My portfolio was worth $140 million, yet I still lived in the same Brooklyn apartment. I owned the Zenith, a 6-0, story glass marvel, and the crown jewel of my real estate holdings, the Bronx Collective, 3 affordable housing complexes that provided dignity to 400 families. The Queen Sanctuary, a premium senior living center where the residents were treated like royalty, not line items. Julian Vane's company, Vane Analytics, was one of my tenants. I had known his father, Arthur Vane, for 20 years. Arthur was a decent man, a man of his word, but 18 months ago, he retired and handed the keys of the kingdom to Julian. That was Hike Muknat Butdo. It wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow, oily decay that I smelled every night, while I was emptying the trash in Julian's executive suite. I sat in Arthur Harmon's office on a Tuesday afternoon. Outside, a cold spring rain lashed against the windows of his midtown suite. Arthur had been my attorney for 20 years. He was the only person who knew exactly how many zeros were in my bank account. He sat across from me, rubbing his temples, looking through a stack of documents that my private investigator, Catherine, had spent 3 months gathering. "It's a classic pump and dump, Sarah," Arthur said, his voice heavy with a mix of professional disgust and personal disappointment. "Julian isn't just mismanaging the firm. He's actively harvesting it." He flipped open a ledger. "He's taking client premiums from the insurance wing, the very money meant to protect people, and diverting them into a shadow crypto trading account. Our records show he's moved over $1.2 million in the last year alone. He's gambling with money that isn't his, hoping to hit a jackpot before the auditors wake up." "Whose money is it exactly?" I asked. My voice was low, but the edge was there. Catherine, the investigator, leaned forward. She was a former forensic accountant, and she didn't believe in small talk. "That's the sickening part, Sarah," she said, tapping a red-tabbed file. "He's targeting the legacy accounts. These aren't high-risk investors. They're long-term care policies for retired teachers, firefighters, and civil servants. People who have been paying in for 30 years, trusting that the Vane name meant security." She looked me dead in the eye. "If one of those teachers gets sick tomorrow and tries to claim their benefits for a nursing home or a surgery, the cupboard is bare. There's no money left for them. Julian has literally turned their life savings into digital dust." I felt a cold, sharp anger settle in my chest, the kind of anger that doesn't scream, but plans. I thought about the people I worked with every day at the senior center. I thought about the residents who stayed humble, worked hard, and trusted the system. "What about my daughter?" I asked. The question felt like lead in my mouth. "Does Clara know?" Catherine sighed and shook her head. "Clara's name isn't on the accounts. She's just the beneficiary of the lifestyle. That $15,000 engagement ring Julian just bought her? It was paid for with a retired librarian's emergency surgery fund. That gala he's planning for your rooftop? Every bottle of vintage wine is being charged to a state pension plan." I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. In the distance, I could see the zenith glowing against the gray clouds. Julian was up there right now, probably looking down at the city and feeling like a god. "He thinks he's a lion," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "He looks down at people like me, the janitors and the lunch ladies, and he thinks we're just mice scurrying around his feet." I turned back to Arthur and Catherine. A cold smile cuối cùng cũng chạm tới bờ môi. It's time to remind Julian Vane who actually built the cage he's sitting in. And more importantly, it's time to show him how quickly the bars can close. This is the moment where the invisible architect stops observing and starts acting. I have to know, if you discovered your future son-in-law was funding your daughter's luxury life by stealing from retirees, would you warn her first, or would you let the trap snap shut to teach them both a lesson? Drop a comment with truth or trap below. I read every single one. And if you're ready to see Julian's empire turn to ash, hit that like button and subscribe. We're about to go from the paper trail to the courtroom. I spent the next week operating in total, calculated silence. I showed up for my shift at exactly 6 p.m., a ghost in a navy blue uniform with Zenith maintenance stitched over the heart. I emptied Julian's trash, wiping away the expensive mahogany dust from his desk, while he sat 3 feet away, laughing vek I virk fa verthier trung vau chick dirn thwar mar vanquamin. I ignored the way his friends' young men in $4,000 suits stepped over my mop bucket without a glance, treating me like a piece of furniture that happened to move. But on Friday, the air in the Zenith felt different. It was the night of the Founders Circle dinner, an elitist gathering Julian had organized to announce his company's expansion. He was vibrant, radiating the unearned confidence of a man who thought he'd finally outrun his debts. He had no idea that at 9 a.m. that morning, Agent Rivera had been sitting at my small kitchen table in Brooklyn. For 3 hours, we had meticulously reviewed the server logs I'd pulled from the very rooms I cleaned every night, the digital fingerprints of a man stealing from the elderly. I didn't wear my uniform that night. Instead, I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out a charcoal gray silk suit that had been waiting for a decade. It was a power suit from my days as a lead architect, tailored to perfection and radiating an authority Julian couldn't possibly understand. I walked into the rooftop club at 8 p.m., the heels of my shoes clicking against the marble I had polished only 24 hours earlier. The room was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. Clara was standing near the bar, glowing in a cream-colored dress that likely cost more than my first car. When her eyes met mine, her glass of vintage champagne nearly slipped from her manicured fingers. "Mom?" she whispered, her face turning a panicked shade of red. She rushed over, looking around frantically to see who was watching. "What are you doing? You can't be here, the staff entrance is in the back. If Julian sees you in that suit..." "Sarah, I thought I made myself clear." Julian's voice cut through the air like a dull blade as he approached us, his face flushing with an arrogant anger. He looked me up and down with genuine disgust. "I told you to stay away from my events. I'm not having a janitor ruin the most important night of my career. Get out now, hoặc tôi sẽ cho đội an ninh lôi bà ra khỏi đây trước mặt mọi người." "That's funny, Julian," I said, my voice projecting with a calm, resonant power that silenced the nearby conversations. "Because I was just about to say the exact same thing to you." The room went tomb quiet. Eleanor Vane stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she adjusted her pearls. "And who do you think you are exactly? This is a private club for founders and owners." "I'm the woman who owns the dirt you're standing on," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "And more importantly, I'm the woman who owns the foundational software your son has been cannibalizing for the last 18 months. I reached into my bag and pulled out the leather-bound journal, the one Julian had tossed aside like garbage. "You called this a scrapbook, Julian, but if you'd possessed even a fraction of the intelligence you claim to have, you would have opened it. You would have seen the original, hand-drawn source code for the Siren Protocol." I held it up for the room to see. "The code I have the primary patent for. The code your firm has been using without a valid license since your father stepped down." Julian let out a laugh, but narong twech, vibrating with the first tremors of genuine fear. "You're delusional. You're a cleaning lady who's watched too many movies." "I'm the CEO of RMD Holdings," I replied, my voice cold and absolute. "And as of 5 minutes ago, I have officially terminated Vane Analytics' lease for the 45th and 46th floors of this building for multiple breaches of contract and suspected illegal activity." The color drained from Julian's face as the elevator dings echoed through the ballroom. The doors slid open, and Agent Rivera stepped out, flanked by 4 uniformed officers. The search warrant in his hand was visible to everyone. "Julian Vane?" Rivera's voice was professional and final. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, grand larceny, and elder financial exploitation." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her fingers gripping Julian's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. "Julian? What is he talking about? Tell them it's a mistake." "Mom, stop this." "It's no mistake, Clara," I said, stepping closer. "Ask him about the legacy accounts. Ask him about the $720,000 he diverted from retired teachers and civil servants just to fund this lifestyle." I gestured to the room. "People who worked 30 years for a safety net. People who are exactly like the janitor you were both so ashamed of." Julian looked toward the service exit, his eyes darting like a trapped animal, but my private security contractors were already blocking every door. As the handcuffs clicked into place, the golden boy of the tech world finally crumbled. He didn't go out with dignity. He started sobbing, his voice cracking as he began blaming the market, his father, and eventually, the very woman he had called a resource only hours before. I stood my ground, watching as they led him away, the man who thought he could steal a legacy from the woman who built the foundation he stood on. This is the moment where the truth koi kum duk phơi bai. If you've stayed with me this far, you know that the best revenge isn't loud, it's strategic. If you love seeing justice served to those who think they're untouchable, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. We have so many more stories like this coming your way. Now, let's see the aftermath of the collapse. The crystal chandeliers still flickered, casting long, hollow shadows across the empty ballroom. But the air felt different now. The heavy, suffocating scent of expensive lilies had been replaced by the cold, honest smell of the rain hitting the glass. After the sirens faded and the gala guests scurried away like rats from a sinking ship, the ballroom was a ghost town. Clara sat in one of the velvet chairs, her head buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with a silent, rhythmic grief. That designer dress, which she had preened in only hours before, now looked like a costume from a play that had gone horribly wrong. "You knew," she whispered, her voice cracking as she looked up through smeared mascara. "You knew the whole time." "I knew Julian was a thief," I said softly, sitting across from her, no longer the invisible woman with a mop, but the architect of the very floor we stood on. "I just didn't know if you were his accomplice or his victim. So I waited. I gave you that journal because it was a litmus test for your soul. I wanted to see if you still valued the history of Noima Chungtath Workvei, or if you had truly traded the heart of the girl who used to help me carry groceries up 4 flights of stairs for a name that didn't belong to you." "I'm so sorry, Mom," she sobbed, the sound raw and echoing in the vast space. I was so tired of feeling like I was nothing. I just wanted to be someone." "You already were someone, Clara," I said, reaching out to tilt her chin up. "You were just looking in the wrong mirrors." The legal destruction of the Vance legacy was swift and absolute. Julian Vane was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for securities fraud and elder financial exploitation. Because I provided the digital keys and the funding for the recovery, my legal team was able to claw back 95% of the stolen funds. We returned every cent to the teachers, firefighters, and librarians whose futures Julian had tried to gamble away. I didn't stop there. I officially announced the conversion of the Zenith. We didn't need another predatory tech firm in this city.